in the shadowed folds of northeastern France. Nestled between crooked hills and moss-veiled trees, there once stood a village called Séveillé Place, so ordinary, so unremarkable, it might have been mistaken for 100 others like it. A stone church with a chipped spire, 12 houses built of gray shale, a single well fed by a spring that tasted faintly of rust. There are no maps today that bear its name, no records in municipal archives, not even in the dusty ledgers of the church. It is as if Séveillé never existed. Men were no longer men but numbers. Commanders no longer saw villages, they saw laboratories. France, desperate to end the slaughter, sanctioned experiments of a nature so arcane they were hidden even from their own parliament. One such initiative was quietly named Projet Mirror Project. His journal, recovered decades later, was heavily redacted, but not entirely empty. His first entry upon installing the mirror read, "It is not glass, it is a threshold." And yet, in the spring of 1917, it vanished. The villagers were asked to sit before the mirror for extended hours, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups. Children were made to hold hands. Elders were instructed to recite prayers backward. No one explained why. The first whisper of Séveillé reached me through a letter aged, scorched on one edge, and sealed in wax black as midnight. Marie Lebeau, widow, age 63, was not called to the communal meal. When questioned, others furrowed their brows. Marie repeated. They would sit in the square, eyes blank, turning slowly to face the mirror at sunset, as if drawn by a string tied to their skulls. Some screamed when they caught their reflection. Others knelt and wept. The land was empty. Not burned, not bombed, empty. Just the absence of Incas, though the hand that wrote history had lifted briefly or forgotten. Carved crudely in block letters, it read, "To remember is to invite. Do not look into the mirror. Do not speak the name." The well was still there, but it now gave water black as ink. The church spire had fallen and lay untouched by wind, where the houses had stood. Only hollows remained, as if the earth itself had swallowed them with care. There is no Marie. Her cottage still stood. No announcement. No retrieval. The final entry in Mercier's journal was not written in his hand, but a child's. The mirror liked him, so it kept him. Her bed still warm. But no one remembered her face. Her clothes were burned that evening without explanation. The ink had bled with time, but the words still clawed at the paper. Find the village that bled for the mirror. They made them forget, but not all. Not me. It was unsigned. On the 15th night, he wrote, "They are not being erased. They are being remembered by something else." What followed was an obsessive excavation through forgotten cartography and abandoned military memos. In plain terms, no one visited and no one left. At 6 feet tall, framed in ornate brass, etched with symbols predating Christ, it refused to reflect anything clearly. Instead, the glass shimmered, always slightly blurred, as though underwater. Those who looked too long into it said it moved, shifted, breathed even. Some claimed they saw not themselves, but versions of themselves that blinked out of time. Perfect for a test. Told the villagers they were to host a temporary observation post. In return, they were given new clothes, fresh tools, even sugar and unimaginable luxury by then. They were told nothing of the mirror. I found one photograph blurry, sepia stand, showing 13 men standing beside a wooden cart, eyes blank, mouths agape, as if frozen mid-scream. On the back, scrawled in a trembling hand, Séveillé, April 1917, right before it began. See, by 1917, the Great War had turned the soil of Europe into a sponge for blood. Séveillé was selected not for strategic value, but for its social homogeneity and geographic isolation. The device was delivered in a crate of black iron, wheeled in by silent soldiers with no insignia. It was no ordinary mirror. The operator assigned to Séveillé was Captain Mercier, a man educated in both physics and theology, a rare combination, and a dangerous one. The experiment, as reconstructed from fragments, involved stimulus exposure and emotional resonance. On the 10th night, the mirror began to hum. And then, one by one, the names began to vanish. It started innocently. By morning, 4 more had never existed.
Captain Mercier's notes grew erratic. He wrote of shadows walking where people once stood, of voices repeating words he had never said. By day 17, only a third of the villagers remained aware of one another.
And then, abruptly, the military closed the project. A week later, a French artillery unit passed through the coordinates once listed for Séveillé. In every archive where Séveillé should have existed, there was only a blank space, not a strike-through, not a redaction. And yet there is one final clue onto a stone found in a trench 50 miles away. But tonight, I have spoken it. Do you remember now? In the weeks that followed, Séveillé did not vanish all at once. Disappearance, it seems, is not an event but a disease of slow rot that begins with forgetting and ends with erasure. The mirror, if it can still be called that, became the center not only of the village, but of the villagers' minds. They stopped harvesting, stopped praying, stopped sleeping in their own beds. Instead, they would gather in silence before the brass-framed threshold and stare, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. It was then that Captain Mercier's records began to shift in tone. It showed me what I might have become had I chosen differently. Witnesses, if that word still applies, describe seeing him kneel before it, whispering into the glass as if confessing sins to a God who could answer but would never forgive. When asked what he saw, he replied, "Not what, who, and they are learning." Entire scenes. Surveil as it had been a century ago, but twisted trees dripping with oil, children playing with bones shaped like chess pieces, and above all, a church without a cross, its bell tolling backward. Those who watched too long began to speak in rhymes they could not stop. One woman, Colette, recited the same poem for 4 days without sleep, until her heart simply ceased to beat. And it hated me for what I was. I do not think it wishes to replace us. I think it wishes to remember us better than we remember ourselves. Gone were the measured observations of a man of science. In their place were fragments of poetry, sketches of symbols that looped endlessly, of names that no one remembers having forgotten. A sacrifice made not to win the war but to test a door. And once opened, some doors never close. And questions repeated dozens of times. Where does memory go when no one holds it? A figure that stood just behind the glass, mimicking every move a moment too late, blinking out of sync. They said he smiled too wide. They said he knocked, sometimes, from inside. Not a single living soul. The mirror stood alone in the square, humming like a lung that never ceased breathing. One girl, Elise, whispered that he had her brother's eyes, but not his name. One soldier tried to smash the glass with his rifle, but the metal twisted, and his body folded inward. His scream never left his throat. "He looks like Jules," she said. But Jules never stood that still. His last entry, scrawled on the back of a photograph of Surveil's main road, read, "I think we built it to see ourselves." But the moment we looked, it saw us instead. And is forgetting a form of mercy or a punishment? He began to suspect something monstrous, that the mirror was not showing an alternate self, but feeding on the self one left behind. The villagers who spent the most time with it became quieter, hollower. Not mad worse than mad. Emptied. Marie's husband, Etienne, sat for 14 hours on the 22nd day. He attempted to move the mirror, but every attempt was met with violent illness among the villagers. Nosebleeds, seizures. One soldier vomited up black feathers and spoke in reverse Latin for 12 minutes before collapsing. The mirror, it seemed, could not be touched. It was no longer a device, it was an inhabitant. That evening, he wandered into the forest behind the church and lay beneath a tree. When Mercier found him, Etienne's body was intact, but his eyes had turned to ash, not burned, collapsed, as though the memory of sight had been erased from his bones. The children were the first to speak of the copyman. Mercier grew increasingly frantic. He requested orders from Paris. No reply. And then, on the 30th day, Mercier himself saw it. In a journal entry dated May 2nd, 1917, he writes, "It wore my skin, but not my eyes." He began speaking to it at night. Something changed on the 35th day. The mirror began to reflect things that were not there. The military, finally stirred by silence rather than noise, sent a detachment. But when they arrived, there was nothing to find. They burned it. Or they tried. But fire did not touch it. Captain Mercier was never found. No graves were dug. No funerals held. The military sealed the area and scrubbed all mention of Séveillé, but they did not destroy the mirror. Couldn't, they buried it. Somewhere beneath the soil of France, under concrete and secrecy, it lies, waiting, reflecting. And every few decades, reports emerge, faint and fragmented, of a reflection that moves too slowly, of a face glimpsed where there should be none. Séveillé was not just erased from the map, it was offered. And now you know. Do you feel it? That pull in the back of your mind? That name on the tip of your tongue? That's where it begins. In 1994, a doctoral candidate at the University of Toulouse stumbled upon a box mislabeled. Inside were 26 water-stained pages, a silver-rimmed monocle, and a torn military insignia still bearing the blackened threads of its original stitching. CPTL Mercier. He traced every mention of Captain Mercier in military archives and found nearly nothing, only a brief citation for field experimentation and a one-line note that read, Operation Perpetual Reflection, shelved indefinitely. He contacted professors, historians, even survivors of the region, though none would speak of a village by that name. The student's name was Julien Roch, a quiet, meticulous man with a fascination for anomalies in wartime cartography. What caught his eye first was not the writing, but the absence. A hand-drawn map with a neat square labeled Séveillé village that, according to every atlas, had never existed. Yet the roads leading to it did. The report was never closed. Beneath it was scrawled, in handwriting not from any typewriter. You can only report the missing if you remember they were there. One page, dated June 12, 1995, reads only, It was never a mirror. He no longer signed his notes as Julien, but rather as version 3, Echo 7, and finally, the true one. That is how it replaces you not in the world, but in the minds of others. I'm not the first Julien. I may not be the last. His last known entry was found tucked inside a French translation of St. Augustine's Confessions. It said, only a single oval smear on the wall above his writing desk, slightly mirrored, slick to the touch, and cold as glass. It was a mouth. Now it remembers my name. Even today, in satellite imagery, there's a clearing in the northeast woods of Meuse, suspiciously geometric, where no trees grow. Julien became obsessed, took to sketching strange diagrams of circles within circles, shapes that seemed to move when glanced at sideways. But those who had worked with Julien remembered something else. The strange reflection in the window of the departmental library. It was always just slightly wrong. A grainy black and white image appeared. A man, standing in an empty field, surrounded by shapes that did not cast shadows. He raised a hand. Behind him, barely visible, was a village familiar, yet wrong where. The buildings were too symmetrical, the trees all bent inward. One student who passed by late at night said he saw Julien's office light flicker then stay on for 7 hours, though no one was inside. The boy with my eyes. He has learned how to write as I do. He will finish what I could not. But the mirror hungers again, and this time it wants to be believed. He insisted on visiting the Meuse woods, where GPS flickered and failed, and compasses spun like broken clocks. But one night, under yellow lamplight, found a single anomaly in the records. A missing persons report filed on May 3, 1917 by a woman named Marie Fournier, the same name from Mercier's notes. From that moment on, Julien changed. His colleagues noticed first. The late nights at the archive, muttering to himself in Latin phrases he did not previously know.
Out.
What Julien found there is uncertain.
Out.
What is certain is that he returned without his voice. He communicated by writing, and he wrote constantly whole journals filled with cryptic observations. His handwriting degraded rapidly after that, curling into frantic, jagged scrawls. When you stare into your reflection, it remembers you better than you remember yourself. That summer, he vanished. His apartment showed no signs of struggle, no broken locks, no missing items. The university hushed the story. A mental break, they called it. A tragic decline. A decade passed, and then in 2006, a French broadcast signal was hijacked for 12 seconds. And then the screen cut to static. Audio analysis revealed a whisper looped in reverse. We remember better than you. Come home. Come whole. No one claimed responsibility. And to this day, Julien Roche's name has been misfiled in every French record database, always appearing one line too late or too early, as though his existence is remembered out of order. But here's the part they cannot explain. In the Louvre archives, hidden behind preserved letters from the Napoleonic era, a newly surfaced journal was found in 2019. It bore the unmistakable signature of Captain Mercier. The ink is fresh. The final page simply reads, "I see him now." They say memory is the last refuge of the lost.
Yes.
But what if memory itself lies? In early 2021, a digital archivist working on declassified wartime files stumbled upon a corrupted drive buried in the French Defense Ministry's redundant backups. Buried beneath layers of misnamed JPEGs and hexcode gibberish was a single file titled Séveillé. First in the distance, then closer. With every cycle, the image sharpened, revealing a young man in a torn uniform, bearing the exact insignia of Captain Mercier. He walked without shadow, his gait ever so slightly off, as if his body remembered a shape it no longer fully possessed. When opened, it did not run, it watched. The screen displayed only a dimly lit field with a shallow fog rolling in waves. Nothing moved until it did. Every 17 minutes, precisely, a figure appeared. The archivist deleted the file, or so he thought. 2 weeks later, his reflections stopped mimicking his movements. Not always, just sometimes. Meanwhile, an investigative podcaster named Dorette, known for her research into forbidden history, received a plain envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single Polaroid photo of a village street, identifiable by old signage as Rue des Cendres. But in forums, fragments still circulate, frame-by-frame dissections revealing something disturbing. The moment the camera drops, a reflection passes through the lens facing the viewer, not her. Only perfect geometry and rows of doors, all slightly ajar. The buildings were of French design, yes, but the windows were all black, as if nothing behind them existed. She filmed her journey for documentation. Footage released in fragments shows her approach through dense forest. Her GPS reads "Surveil," one user wrote. "It moved when I didn't. It smiled when I frowned." The street had no people, only a single mirror, freestanding, facing away from the camera. Born in 1901, died in 1917, in Séveillé. Not by mods, should not know her. But now, I remember her face perfectly, her voice, her scent, the lullaby she used to sing. I've read Mercier's letters. I've followed Julien's sketches. I've stared too long into windows that guarantee belong to any room I've entered. By the system itself, scrawled in faint pencil on the photo's back. They're still rehearsing you. But I cannot tell where it ends and I begin. At the center stands a stone well, ringed with rusted tools and a child's boot. She whispers, "I hear them." And then the camera tilts, as if ripped from her hand. Trace the location through ancient cadastral maps and tracked it to the same unnatural clearing near Meuse, where Julien Roche had disappeared. But no such coordinate exists. In the final clip, never aired, but obtained through anonymous leaks, reaches the clearing. Authorities claimed her disappearance was a tragic misadventure. The footage was confiscated, the YouTube video taken down for policy violations, and in that reflection, there is no forest. Then came the emails. Over 300 people who viewed the video. /Frame reported seeing unfamiliar faces in mirrors within 48 hours, many describing them as versions of themselves. But cleaner, colder, rehearsed, soon after, the Séveillé subreddit was deleted. I tell you this now because I've traced every source, and last night I found something. In the oldest archive of my own family's genealogy, a name reappeared. Dorette listed not as a researcher, but as a great-aunt. That is impossible. I have never met her. It is not my memory. So before this happens to you, B, for they remember you better than you remember yourself, ask you, do you see yourself in your mirror right now? Look again. If your reflection smiles too early, do not smile back.